Hey there, my fellow extraterrestrials. I'm still a bit sick, but doing a little better than I was in the last video. Um, can probably still tell though. And again, okay, I've got contacts in, so I made it that far, but still another naked face. And anyway, this video is going to be a bit longer, quite a bit longer probably than the last one, because we are now to the blog about why we don't know as much of our ancient history as we really should. Um, I get asked a lot, actually, what I think about why don't we know? Why didn't our ancestors write more down? Why has so much been lost to history? I've had many discussions about this with many people, many interesting people, all of whom, have their own perspectives. And many are on the same agreement that a lot of our history has been lost simply due to the carelessness and stupidity and recklessness of our ancestors, always warring and fighting with one another. But actually, there's quite a bit more to consider when it comes to how much of our history survives. And so buckle in for this one, because it's going to be a discussion. And I will do my best to not sound sick and to not be gunky, but I'm gonna need some coffee. I'm gonna need some coffee for this one. Okay, I'm good. We're doing this. So, for starters, one reason why a lot of our history gets lost along the way is because the complexity of languages. So, right now, just using English as an example, because I'm speaking English in this video, we have so many variations of just the English language and the modern English that there are times where we can't even understand one another depending on which English you learned and from which region and your dialect and your accents. We sometimes struggle in modern times with English, and you'll notice even across the generations, from the younger children up through grandparents, great grandparents, there's sometimes this lack of understanding because the English language, like all languages, changes and evolves and develops with new slang, new terms, new advancements. Sometimes you have to come up with new terminology for things that didn't exist in prior generations. So languages are always developing. And when you think about just that alone from one generation to the next and in one language, now imagine thousands and thousands of years in between and across all languages. So, for example, when the original contents of the Bible was being translated, it was being translated from its original Hebrew, which has also since changed, and it was being translated into Latin and then later into English. So this is why there's problems sometimes. You run into things that you get arguments across the different practitioners of the variations of the Christian religion who follow the Bible simply because sometimes the terminology differs. Sometimes it's interpreted one way by this group than it is by this group. And you have that. So when you're trying to translate an ancient language that no one has spoken or even heard for thousands of years, and you're using modern terminology in a completely different language, you're going to lose information. You're going to misinterpret things. There's going to be issues. So that affects our history and why we maybe don't know what is plainly written in another language, an ancient language. It might be that it has been documented by our ancestors, but we just didn't understand it. We haven't interpreted it and able to ever understand it. So that being said, language affects how history is presented in later years. And lost languages, especially, are difficult even now for scholars to try and piece together. And there is a lot of history that is still waiting to be translated, waiting to be interpreted by modern scholars in the Sanskrit language. I think something like 10% of it has been translated. There's a lot there. So now, once you get past that, you also run into the issue of context and how much survived. If way back when, thousands of years ago, an ancient manuscript was written and but so much of it survived, only maybe the middle part of it, well, it's out of context. We don't know the before and the after and even what it correlates to sometimes. So when you have missing information and information out of context and nothing else to compare it to go on, sometimes historians, they do their best to try and place, what is this reference to? What is this referring to? Is this an account of this event? Does this correlate to this? And often they make an assumption that at the time they're going off of what information they have and what's known and what's available. And then later on we find out they were wrong. It didn't pertain to that at all. It pertains to something entirely different. They get new information later as new discoveries are made. And once we have something to contextualize this information, then we can piece together a more coherent history. So unfortunately, we come across that quite a bit. Archaeology sometimes, that's the struggle, is you find something, you find a piece of something, but you don't find the rest of it. And you don't even know if the rest of it survived, if you'll ever find it. And so you kind of just have this little tidbit to go off of, and there you have it. And you make do with what you have. And that's unfortunate, but sometimes things that may not be pertaining to any history that we know at all, it may be pertaining to something that we haven't even thought of yet, they just get lumped in with the known history because this is what we're familiar with. We know that this happened, so this must be referring to this. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And sometimes we find out later on, and other times we're just left kind of wondering, what does this have to do with this? This has been put with this. But sometimes things you can almost tell, they seem unrelated, and you don't know for sure that this history goes with this, but we have nothing else to go on. And so it's just been placed with that. Now, moving on from that, sometimes the misplacement of information or of historical context is intentional. And this is due to changing in religious perspectives and in belief, and changing in politics, and the changing of who happens to be in charge at the time. So sometimes things are intentionally misrepresented. Sometimes they are eradicated altogether. Sometimes things are rewritten in order to support another ideology, and they are not historically accurate anymore. And that happens. That's unfortunate as well. I'm personally of the mind that one should never allow their own beliefs or politics of any kind to influence their behavior in such a way that they would actually tamper with history. I don't think history should be tampered with. I think it should be left as it is. But that's a me thing. But unfortunately, it's a regular occurrence. This is why they say history is written by the victor, because this is true. If you want to eradicate your enemies and make them look bad and justify having committed a genocide, what are you going to do? You're going to destroy all of their history, and you're going to fabricate a new history that paints you in the favorable light. And that has happened quite a bit, just that we know of. What about prehistory? What about what we don't know of? We can sometimes piece it back together with new discoveries when we find things that contradict what we thought we knew. There have been times where we did not think certain people existed. We thought they were made up, or certain places, certain things that we used to believe were just fictional. And then archaeologists found those places, found the evidence of those people, and learned new things about them that contradicted what we had, the written accounts that we had, because the written accounts that we had were from another people, from neighboring people, from conquering people, whatever the case may be. For example, the Canaanites. We really didn't have much to go on, and some believed that they were fictional, that they didn't exist. They were just a made-up people in the Bible. Turns out they existed. And the account that we have in the biblical text is not adding up with what archaeologists have discovered about them. Therein lies another example of a genocide that was committed, and history rewrote those people, their civilization, to paint them in a less than favorable light so that it was justified to eradicate them. Which is not me calling into question or condemning anybody. I am not pointing fingers at anyone. This is just an example, one of many examples that happens across all cultures, unfortunately, all ancestry, all countries, all religions. Everybody has at some point, their people or their ancestors have been guilty of this in one way or another, because that's human beings for you. We are like that. Now, some cultures do strive more to preserve histories, even if they don't like them, than others do. But ultimately, we're really just dealing with people interpreting an ancient history and what's left of that ancient history after the people that came before us did everything in their power to eradicate one another, to change history, or to simply cover it all up. So there's only so much we can do. And this is not about placing the blame or pointing out the evils of one group over another. This is more about pointing out that this is a habit. And when you have something that occurs over and over across all regions, across all peoples, all throughout all time periods of history, it gets really difficult to piece together a full history of what actually happened. And we're left with speculation, we're left with what little evidence we have, we're left with the accounts that we actually have written down, and hoping that those accounts are accurate. That is what we have. So that's something to be considered. And as for the politics of it, we're all familiar with how establishment and politicians work. Nobody, I think, is going to be surprised about hearing that, the powers that be may or may not have controlled information during certain time periods to avoid the people knowing things that they didn't want them to know. That's just how it was. It's nothing new. Politicians want to stay in power. Kings want to stay in power. Emperors want to stay in power. They don't want the people rising up. And sometimes it's not always an evil thing. Sometimes we're not always talking about evil politicians or the powers of be wanting to stay in power. Sometimes it's they don't want panic. They are trying to protect people. Sometimes it's a good thing. It's misguided, but it's a good thing. Other times it's they simply didn't understand what was going on around them. There are ancient accounts of tribal leaders and religious leaders misinterpreting like natural disasters and events in Mother Nature simply because they didn't understand what it was. So it's not always malicious, but it happens. Sometimes the history is written by the politicians, and you just have to take that with a grain of salt because politicians. Now, another thing, this is one thing that I have been reiterating no matter what subject matter we're on. I like to point out that we're kind of dumb. Humans, we're dumb, especially compared to our ancestors. I know, so many people say that, well, we're more advanced. Look at the technology, look at our evolution, look at everything we've developed. Well, that's not necessarily proof that we're more intelligent. That is more of an adaptation. There's a difference between evolving and adapting, in my opinion. Now, you can change and adapt and become something different. That doesn't necessarily make you an improvement. It doesn't make you superior. It may, in fact, make you inferior. And I believe that's what has happened with modern humanity, that we have become so dependent on our technology and on being told something happened. We don't go out and investigate for ourselves. We don't observe for ourselves and come to our own conclusion like so many of our ancestors did. Now we just pull up a device. We just Google everything. And the part of the brain that is responsible for creative thinking and for problem solving has atrophied in modern generation. We are inferior, in my opinion. And this also leads me to believe that perhaps some of the conclusions that modern scholars are coming to, some of the interpretations of newer discoveries, are way off the mark. They don't understand it. It is beyond our comprehension to understand some of what we have uncovered from our ancient ancestors because they were way more intelligent than we are. It is simply beyond us. And I know I may not be sharing a very popular opinion in this. I may be alone on this hill for all that matter, but I do intend to die on it. Because from what I've seen from modern humanity, comparatively, our ancestors were way more fascinating than we are. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of the reason we don't really know our history is because we're just not capable of interpreting what they have left for us. And it may not be as obvious, it may not be in written text. Our ancestors likely had several different means by which they communicated. They likely had other ways of expressing themselves, of leaving behind information, of leaving behind data. They may have even found a way to inscribe data upon some of the ancient crystalline structures they left behind. And we just haven't found a way to extract that data. There may be full suppositories of information hidden in plain sight that we're just not capable of seeing, of finding, because we've lost that ability, we've lost that knowledge, we've lost the previous means of communication. We have become so dependent on written and verbal communication that the more natural means of communication have been dulled. Some of us still have those instincts and are still capable, things like understanding silent communication cues, body structure, body movements. Some of us are still capable of understanding in ways that our ancestors most likely relied upon more heavily than what we do. But I don't think that we are capable of understanding to their level. And that may be the problem. We no longer possess the ability to access the information that they have left for us. So that is something I tend to talk more about in my book. There's like entire chapters on various technologies and ancient ways in which the ancestors may have communicated and all sorts of things, because I really think we are lacking. I really think as modern Homo sapiens, we do not have the understanding, the knowledge, and the capabilities that the ancient people of Earth once had, because we rely too heavily upon the technology. And once the technology became so convenient and so readily available, you know, those instincts and those natural abilities within us have atrophied. And we've also become rather lazy. So some of it, I think, is the fact that our ancestors were probably way more capable and way more intelligent than we currently are. Now, another contributing factor to why our history is probably lacking, we may only know but so much, is because of too many interpretations, too many retellings. The waters have been too muddied. We've had too many accounts. Sometimes you go back through history and you see, okay, well, where did this information first come from? Well, so and so told his people, but he got it from such and such read it from such and such, and so read it from a tablet that no longer even exists. We can't find it or place it. So basically, it has gone through so many, almost like a rumor. You know, by the time you hear a rumor, it's probably been changed so many times from whoever started the rumor and whatever it originally was, that it's nothing even like what the original information was. So that's, in my opinion, a lot of what we have to deal with history, because we don't have the original source. We have retellings. And again, those retellings have gone through multiple languages over thousands of years. So much has been lost, so much has been changed. And what we have now probably isn't anything close to whatever actually occurred. So there's something to be said there. It's one of the things that I had mentioned in my big to-do about Plato's telling of Atlantis, was that we don't really know where he got his information from and how he interpreted it. Supposedly, you know, this is something that came from the Egyptians, and we don't know how their story of it went or their retellings. And really, we just have very little to go on other than Plato's account. So this is one of those things where it's like our own history, our own, what we consider to be an accurate written human history, is primarily based in the Judaic religious texts and the biblical accounts. And then what we have from archaeology, uncovering what pieces they have from other sources. And of course, the oral traditions of the various tribes all across the world. So we don't have a source. We don't have a suppository. We don't have something that is a first-hand account of everything, our history, where we came from, what happened on this planet. We don't really have that. We have a lot of retellings and a lot of interpretations that may or may not have also been either skewed by emotions and feelings and interpretations of those who translated them, or intentionally altered for religious or political purposes. So, again, take our history with a grain of salt. History is one of those things, like, you think history's already been written. You think history is unchanging. You think once you know history, you have learned it all, it's not going to change. That is not the case. History changes quite a bit. History remains to be one of the most fascinating subjects. It's why I do what I do, because history is always revealing something new and changing what we thought we knew about it. So, you know, this is one of those things where I could go on and on, but I'm not going to. This is going to be a long enough video. And plus, I'm still sicken. Moving on. The combined consequences of all of the aforementioned issues leaves us with a sort of, it's almost like an outline of a novel. We don't really know all the details yet. We just have a bit of a timeline, and this happened here, and this may or may not have happened there. We don't really have a full, cohesive story. And that's unfortunate, because there are a great deal many questions that a lot of us would love to have answers for. Me personally, I'm all about the questions themselves and finding more questions and keeping the conversation going, of course. But there are some things that even I want to know, okay, what actually happened here? There are some things for which I would like answers. And many of those things we will likely never have answers for, because most of the things that interest me, of course, happen to be well way back within our prehistory. By that I mean like 12,000 plus years. Like if it's within the last 6,000 years, it's too recent for me. So that's just, again, another personal appreciation for me. Like all history has its fascinating aspects. I love history. There are certain time periods or certain cultures' histories that are more fascinating to me than others. That's normal for most people, I think. Most people have their preferences. As far as recent history goes, I am fascinated by World War II time period, and not because of the war itself, not things having to do with that so much, but because of the people who all happen to live during the same time period. We are talking about a time period in which, let me just take a moment here to point out that we had some of the biggest names in all of our known written history all living at the same time. Some of the most brilliant minds all living at the same time, probably knowing one another and regularly communicating with one another. So to me, that time period is fascinating. That might have been peak for our written history, for our species, our evolution, because we had Einstein and Tesla and von Buren and Marshall, and I can go on here. We had Aleister Crowley. We had, and of course, I don't want to bring Hitler into this, but we had him too, and it's like, yeah, never mind who he was and what he did, but he did also have a fascination in ancient cultures and stuff, which is what led to more exploration. So, like, we had these curious beings, these thinkers, and these perpetuators of archaeology, if you will, all around the same time, all asking the questions of who are we, why are we here, what about what came before us? All of these people in the same time period. To me, that's fascinating. So I also am of the mind that because history tends to repeat itself, history tends to happen in cycles, it may just be that history was repeating itself when they were all around, just like all of those great thinkers that were around Pythagoras' time, Plato, Socrates, all of the Athens philosophers. It seems like we have time periods in which no one is asking questions and things are being lost, history's being forgotten, nobody cares what's going on, nobody's observing the world around them. And then we have time periods in which everybody is interested and everybody is fascinated and everybody is exploring and asking questions. So those are the time periods that I'm most fascinated by, because I like to see the things that they were thinking about. I like to see the questions they were asking, the things that they were writing about, and their contributions to our knowledge and our understanding of our history. Because without those thinkers, how much of our history would have survived? In my opinion, we're missing massive chunks of it as it is. But we probably have more than what we would have had without people like those people in those different specific time periods asking those questions. So I like those time periods, and I like the people in those time periods. I wish I could have been in one of those time periods and have met those great thinkers and have had some of these debates with them, because that would have been fun. But unfortunately, I live in the modern time period in which we think we know everything, and we think we're so superior because of all this technology. But in all honesty, we're lacking. We're lacking in our understanding of our history. We're lacking in our understanding of one another and other cultures. And a lot of it is due to the fact that history, once it's gone, like, we don't know what happened to so many people. And some of that could have very well been due to lack of understanding of their own history. Because when you understand a history, when you understand that A leads to B, then you can foresee it coming and you can prevent it. So, in my opinion, it's quite possible that the reason some people no longer exist is because they also were ignorant in their own history. They did not have the ability to foresee what would become of them. They couldn't predict the consequences of their own actions. And I think we may be headed that way. Not to be a cataclysmist and all this, but, you know, if we continue to ignore history and to want to cover it up, eradicate it, not talk about it because it's offensive, and just rely on Google for information, we're going to reach a point where we don't know anything at all, and not enough to prevent whatever our future may be. So, for me at least, I'm still interested in uncovering what all we are missing in history. I still want to know. I still have so many questions. And I hope you all find this fascinating. I hope you all check out the full blog, because it's rather a long one. There's more information in that blog. As always, I'm a better writer than I am a speaker, so I get more into detail in the blogs. So give that a read, give that a look over. And as always, stay extra, my fellow terrestrials. I'm gonna go have me some more coffee and probably some cold medicine because I'm still icky.